Hello and welcome. I am so happy that you have joined me here today. Today we're continuing our study in the book of Nehemiah. We're looking at Nehemiah chapter 6 today. So please grab yourself a cuppa and we'll get started. Now the walls of Jerusalem, they are almost finished. So the gaps have been closed, but the gates are still yet to be finished. And for some of the enemies of Nehemiah and the work of God, this was a now or never time to try and defeat the rebuilding of the walls. If Nehemiah's enemies didn't do something immediately to stop the work, the walls are very soon going to be completely finished. Verse 1, Then the word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Gershom the Arab, and the rest of our enemies, that I had rebuilt the wall, and not a gap was left in it. Though up to this time I had not set the doors in place and the gates, or the doors and the gates in place. Sanballat and Gershom sent me this message: Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. So Sanballat, Tobiah and Gershom and all the other enemies, they had found out that the walls were being rebuilt and had been rebuilt, but the doors and the gates weren't finished yet. And they begin to employ some new tactics. So Sanballat and Gershom had invited Nehemiah to come, let's meet together at the plains of Ono. So at this time, Sanballat and Gershom, they tried to arrange a meeting with Nehemiah. By superficial appearances, it looked like a friendly meeting, perhaps even a reconciliation. Now, Ono is a beautiful place. You can Google it, lush green fields. So the invitation must have been very enticing. A break for a few days, a rest in a relaxing place, beautiful, picturesque, on the plain of Ono. But Ono, Nehemiah, you better watch out. Verse 3. So I sent messengers to them with this reply: I am carrying out a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it to go down to you? 4 times they sent this same message, and each time I gave the same answer. So Nehemiah's response shows a good level of discernment. Nehemiah said, I'm doing a great work, so I can't come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and come down to you? So discernment gave Nehemiah focus. He knew what God wanted him to be doing, and he did that. He wouldn't be sidetracked by the things that sounded good but were not of the Lord and not what God wanted him to do. Nehemiah wasn't going to let their approach distract him from the work that he needed to do. Nehemiah knew that Sanballat and Gershom had planned to harm him, and Nehemiah was equipped with discernment to see through the outward appearances and understand that Sanballat's seemingly friendly offer, he understood what it was really about. So discernment is the ability to judge the facts of matters according to God's view of them and not according to its outward appearances. So we often are deceived by outward appearances, and some people confuse being discerning with being sort of negative or cynical, but discernment is actually just being able to see the good in something where others might miss it, or being able to see the bad or the warning signs that might seem good by the outward appearances. So as Nehemiah did, and it's important for us to discern when something is truly from God, and also when a person is in fact sent by God, or when somebody is sent by the enemy to distract or disrupt a project. Verse 5, Then the 5th time Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message in his hand, and this time it was an unsealed letter. So in this verse, we can say it's the fifth time Sanballat and Tobiah have tried to persuade Nehemiah to stop the building project and come visit them at the plain of Ono. So this repeated request for an audience with Nehemiah just revealed the persistent and deceptive and desperate nature of their enemies. And in refusing to accept Nehemiah's repeated rejections of that invitation, it demonstrated their unyielding determination to disrupt the building project of Jerusalem's walls. Now, it's recorded that Sanballat sent an unsealed letter. So in ancient Near Eastern times, official correspondence was always sealed to ensure that there was privacy and also to ensure authenticity of the document. So a clay seal was often called a bulle or a bulla. So a bulla is sort of inscribed clay, or it could be soft metal, or it could be bitumen or wax, and it's used in commercial and legal documents as a form of to tamper-proof whatever was attached inside it. So the unsealed letter is therefore sort of violated to the established protocol of normal correspondence, and so it kind of served really this open letter. It served as a propaganda tool, making the correspondence public to anybody who came across this letter. So this unsealed letter was really a deliberate and public act of disrespect and intimidation meant to shame Nehemiah and spread false and damaging rumours. So in this letter we can see verse 6, in which it was written, it is reported among the nations, and Gershom says it's true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are rebuilding the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king, and have been appointed prophets and make proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. And now this report will get back to the king, that is King Artaxerxes. So come, let us meet together. So verse 6, Sanballat says, it is reported among the nations, and Gershom, of all people, Gershom says it's true. So Sanballat's slander begins by the way of a verbal attack. And most verbal attacks start this way. It's a report that what others are saying is true. So it's a vague accusation. It's often sounded like everyone's talking about this or everybody's saying this. And so such vague words can easily and intentionally give the wrong impression. And so what Sanballat accuses Nehemiah of was actually false. And even if 1,000 people had reported it, it still wouldn't make it true. A popular lie is more dangerous, but it is not any more true just because it is popular. So the letter said, the Jews plan to rebel, and you may be their king, and you have appointed prophets to proclaim it. So these are lies, and these lies they outraged Nehemiah. He had worked hard and trusted God greatly so that this work would be done with the blessing of the king. So King Artaxerxes, he had blessed this. He had supported, he had given financial contributions and resources to this project. He really had the support of the king. Now Nehemiah had also embraced great personal sacrifice and had demonstrated that he was not in this for himself. And now he's accused of the very things that he had worked so hard to not fall into. Verse 7 says, these matters will be reported to the king, so come, let us consult together. So Sanballat is making a direct threat to Nehemiah. He's saying, I'm going to dob you in, basically. He's giving scare tactics used to draw Nehemiah away from his mission. And Nehemiah, he wouldn't be deceived into coming to this meeting. He had too much discernment for that. So now Sanballat, he tries this new manipulation technique toward Nehemiah. And when we're manipulated like this, it can be severely tempting to defend ourselves. But Nehemiah, instead of defending himself, he says, verse 8, I sent them this reply. Nothing like this, nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. And this would have to be my most favourite verse out of the whole book of Nehemiah. Let me just read it to you again. He says, nothing like what you were saying is happening. You were just making it up out of your head. So Nehemiah replied by calmly and straightforwardly telling Sanballat that he is a liar, and by continuing on with the work of the wall. So he's just saying, you're a liar. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Nehemiah did not mount an elaborate defense. He didn't try and prove that Sanballat was wrong point by point by point. He could have compiled a detailed response, but it would have been time consuming and exhausting, and it wouldn't have achieved anything anyway. And Nehemiah knew this. Nehemiah wasn't going to waste any time or any energy on this false claim. So you don't satisfy men like Sanballat with facts and explanations and evidence. So just call it out. What you're saying is a lie and move on with what God has called you to do. Verse 9, they were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands. So Nehemiah's response to this new approach of intimidation was a simple prayer for divine strength. Don't we have a lot to learn from Nehemiah? Verse 10. One day I went to the house of Shemaiah, son of Delaiah, the son of Methatel, who was shut in at his home. And he said, let us meet in the house of God, inside the temple. Let us close the temple doors, because men are coming to kill you. By night they are coming to kill you. So this man, Shemaiah, is said to be a prophet, but he was kind of like a prophet for hire. Shemaiah offered Nehemiah a safe haven in the temple, but it was actually a trick, because only priests were allowed in the temple, and Nehemiah was not a priest. Nehemiah would have been disobeying God had he gone with Shemaiah and with what Shemaiah had suggested and gone into the temple. In 2 Chronicles 26, we see King Uzziah, who wasn't a priest. He went into the temple of God and was instantly struck down with leprosy. So Nehemiah may have known this story. Shemaiah knew how to use religious talk, and it was so he used it manipulatively, and he used it to be a deceptive trap. So if Nehemiah believed Shemaiah's religious talk, he would have sinned, and he would have given others something to find fault about him, and it would have discredited Nehemiah's integrity. Verse 11, but I said, should a man like me run away, or should someone like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. And I realized that God had not sent him, but that he had prophesied against me, because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He had been hired to intimidate me so that I would commit sins by doing this, and then they would have to give me a bad name and to discredit me. So Shemaiah tried to create fear in Nehemiah and tried to get him to disobey God based on a fear he hoped to instill in Nehemiah. But Nehemiah, he stood brave against this religious deception and this intimidation and this temptation, and his commitment was to be obedient to God. And God revealed to Nehemiah the heart of Shemaiah, that he wasn't a true prophet, and he was under the pay of his enemies Tobiah and Sanballat. Verse 14, remember Tobiah and Sanballat, my God, because of what they have done. Remember also the prophet Noadiah, and how she and the rest of the people have been trying to intimidate me. So instead of lashing out against Shemaiah and his fellow false religionists, he simply committed these wicked men and a woman actually, and this whole situation to God. And if God could take care of Nehemiah, then he could take care of this scheme that was going on according to God's wisdom. And so it's just like Hezekiah did in 2 Kings verse 19. So when he heard a report and he'd received news about an enemy invading, Hezekiah, in verse 14, Hezekiah received a letter from the messenger and he read it. And he went up to the temple of the Lord and he spread it out before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord. So Hezekiah, he'd laid out the issue before the Lord and he asked God to deal with it, because it was an issue that only God to deal with. And so when we're in similar situations, we must do what Nehemiah and Hezekiah did. We must pray for God's strength, his power in our lives. And we cannot overcome the slander and the fear of our enemies by our own strength, because it's not by might nor by power, but by the Spirit of God. We see that in Zechariah 4 verse 6. Verse 15, so the war was completed on the 25th of Elul, 52 days. When all our enemies heard about this, and all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence, because they realized that the work had been done with the help of God. So it only took 52 days to rebuild the wall, and the amount of time it took to finish the job was remarkably short. The walls were in ruins for 100 years, and then they were set right in a period of just 52 days. So these verses describe the reaction of the enemies to the completion of the walls around Jerusalem. And when the surrounding nations heard about the wall's completions, they were afraid and they lost their confidence because they recognized that this project had successfully been completed because of God's help and divine hand upon this project. Their enemies were disheartened, not just because the wall had been finished, but because this was evidence that God did the work and God was on the side of the Jews. The enemies were afraid because they realized that the Jews had successfully rebuilt the wall in an impossibly short time, which they understood could only have been accomplished with God's miraculous help. And it meant that that God could achieve the impossible. He was on the side of the Jews. And this instilled fear because the enemies realized that this powerful God wasn't on their side. So if it took such little time to complete the walls, it's only 52 days, why didn't the job get done 100 years ago? So it wasn't just that the people saw the problem. It wasn't just the walls were not wanted. Many people saw the broken walls and they knew that it had ruined the lives of the people in Jerusalem, but nobody had got past the place of just wishing it to be done. People wanted it done. They would have realized the benefits of it had been done, but no one actually did the job. So finally there came a man, Nehemiah, who did more than just wish Jerusalem had walls. He grieved and he ate and he prayed and he planned and he acted boldly. He went and he fought and he encouraged, he stood strong and he saw the job through to the completion. But he also had the people around him with the same heart because he encouraged them and they were encouraged by the Lord and what he had done. Verse 17. Also, in those days, the nobles of Judah were sending many letters to Tobiah, and the replies from Tobiah kept coming to them. For many in Jerusalem were under an oath to him, since he was the son of Shechaniah, son of Arah, and his son Jehoiathan had married the daughter of Meshullam, son of Bechariah. Sorry, I have mashed that. Verse 19, moreover, they kept reporting to me his good deeds and telling him what I said. And Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me. Oh dear. On one hand, he is accused of much trouble. So he's caused much trouble. This is Tobiah. He's caused a lot of trouble and opposition in rebuilding on the walls. And on the other hand, there's a lot of Jews that are supporting Tobiah. So the nobles of Judah had no trouble in being friends with such a man because his family ties to many of the people in Judah. In fact, they had tried to recommend him to Nehemiah, so they reported Tobiah's good deeds to Nehemiah. And so these Jewish brothers of Nehemiah could not see what was so plain to Nehemiah. Nehemiah saw his deception, but there was other Jews that were supporting Tobiah. So perhaps they did not see much of the evil work that Tobiah had done. They hadn't seen that firsthand, so they maybe have had trouble in believing it. So let's just recall who Tobiah was. So Tobiah, he was an Ammonite, but Tobiah's name is a Jewish name. He's a man of influence, and he was the governor of Ammon. He was associated with the high priest family through marriage. The name Tobiah was a prominent name in priestly families, and for generations to come. His name means Yahweh is good. And so it's a strange name for a man who was an opponent to God's work. And just for curiosity's sake, the Ammonites were descendants of Lot. Now, Tobiah, he was the man who was opposed to rebuilding the wall, like Sanballat and Gershom. So in Nehemiah 2 verse 10, he disrupted, he was disturbed that Nehemiah had come to rebuild the walls. 2 verse 19 and 4 verse 3, he mocked Nehemiah's work. Nehemiah 4 verse 7, he was angry with the work that was being done. In Nehemiah 6, he was one of the men who tried to get Nehemiah to stop the work and to come to the plain of Ono so that he could be attacked. So Tobiah's continuing opposition might have sidetracked Nehemiah from God's given task, but Nehemiah remained focused on what God wanted him to do. Now that's all I've got for you from Nehemiah chapter 6. It's been a pleasure spending time with you, and I'll see you next time when we look at Nehemiah chapter 7. Bye.